Hello, my name is Nicole McLaughlin. I'm a health and safety specialist with WorkSafe NB. Today, I will be highlighting the provisions under the Occupational Health and Safety Act pertaining to duties and obligations of supervisors. The outline for today's presentation include the enactment of the changes involved with the supervisor sections, why the changes took place, what exactly has changed in the Occupational Health and Safety Act, how health and safety officer interventions will be affected by these changes, and I will also highlight some tools and resources to help you comply with the modified legislation. The changes to the New Brunswick Occupational Health and Safety Act to include specific sections related to supervision occurred on January 1st, 2020. In general, when there is an important modification to the occupational health and safety legislation, WorkSafe NB undertakes a phased-in approach with respect to compliance and enforcement. The phased-in approach includes the development of resources for affected parties, including WorkSafe NB staff and external affected parties. In 2020, we focused on increasing awareness. However, during this time, the WorkSafe NB health and safety officers were able to write orders under Section 9.1 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act to remedy situations they encountered. In 2021, health and safety officers are determining competent or sufficient supervision using a supervisor assessment tool. You may be wondering, why did the changes to the Occupational Health and Safety Act take place? There was no separate definition for supervisors and employers. The definition combined both, and thus the duties and obligations of supervisors and employers were not distinctly spelled out in the province's Occupational Health and Safety Act. Even at WorkSafe NB, staff often struggled in identifying the responsible party or parties during compliance and enforcement activities. The language that was frequently used was, is this the responsibility of the big E employer, meaning the corporate entity, or the small E employer, referring to the supervisor? The government passed amendments to the Occupational Health and Safety Act in December 2019 to make the different parties' responsibilities for safety clear in legislation. It was also noted that most Canadian jurisdictions had separate requirements for employers and supervisors in their occupational health and safety legislation. In the Occupational Health and Safety Act prior to January 2020, employer was defined as A person who employs one or more employees or the person's agent, B, a manager, superintendent, supervisor, overseer, or any person having authority over an employee at a place of employment, or C, an agent of any person referred to in paragraph A or B. We can see that in red that the titles of manager, superintendent, supervisor, overseer was included in the employer definition. To rectify the lack of clarity, the definition of employer was amended to include persons who employ employees, such as persons being on someone's payroll. Because of the changes to the definition of employer, a new definition for supervisor was required and is as follows. Supervisor means a person who is authorized by an employer to supervise or direct the work of the employer's employees. So how does this definition translate to the situation at your workplace? You will note that there are three important parts to the supervisor definition. Firstly, authorized by an employer. This means that the employer has given the supervisor official permission to supervise and direct the work of others. Clues to look for include titles, increased salary, and acting designations. Examples of titles include manager or acting manager, director, acting director, superintendent, overseer, foreman, charge or head nurse, and department head. Lead hands and experienced employees who have been officially designated by the employer to mentor or supervise the work of other employees may also be included in the definition of supervisor. It would normally exclude informal or ad hoc designations such as, I have to leave for an hour, you're in charge. However, if they are supervising directing work, they would still be considered a supervisor despite not having the title, as explained in the second part of the definition. So let's now talk about the second part of the definition, supervise or direct the work. This can include setting goals, providing instruction, organizing work groups, assigning tasks, problem solving, enforcing rules, checking performance, and being accountable for quality and production of teams. Thirdly, the employer's employees. A supervisor's responsibilities apply to employees who work for the same employer as them. There are cases where employees are hired to do work for the employer through an external party, such as a temporary employment agency, labor broker contract, or contractor subcontractor. In these circumstances, a supervisor's responsibilities could apply to those employees if the supervisor's employer requires those employees to work under the supervision, direction, and/or control of the supervisor. There is also an interpretation related to the supervisor definition that is available on our website that can help you determine who is a supervisor in your workplace. So what are the specific duties and responsibilities of supervisors? They are detailed in Section 9.1, Subsection 1 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. You will note that their duties and responsibilities mirror those of employers as outlined in Section 9.1 and parts of Section 9.2 of the Act, which includes A. Taking precautions to ensure the health and safety of employees under their supervision. B. Complying with the provisions of the legislation pertaining to the work under their direction. C. Making sure that employees under their supervision complies with legislation. And D. Cooperating with the officer during an inspection and, if established, the JHSC or a health and safety representative. These duties are very general in nature and cover a lot of diverse situations. As we saw, Section 9.1, Subsection 1 was quite general, and so Section 9.1, Subsection 2 gives us more specifics as to how a supervisor is to take every reasonable precaution to ensure the health and safety of their employees. The key is communication. Supervisors are responsible to A. Familiarize employees under their direction of the hazards of the work. B. Make sure that their employees have the information they need to work safely. And C. Provide, where necessary, additional instruction on safe work practices to supplement the information shared with the employees. One matter you will see absent from the responsibilities of supervisors is the need to provide training when you compare it to the responsibilities of employers. This responsibility was not added to supervisors as it was deemed that the need to provide the required training remained with the employer. Note that all supervisor duties are shared with the employer. Additional changes to responsibilities of supervisors that may not be obvious. Take, for example, Section 51, Subsection 11, which is found in the General Regulation 91-191. An employer and a contractor shall ensure that an employee wears a life jacket or a personal flotation device when participating in a rescue. Previously to the change, supervisors, by virtue of being included in the definition of employer, were also directly responsible to ensure compliance with this provision. Now, as a result to the changes, supervisors have indirect responsibility to ensure compliance by ensuring that employees under their supervision meet this requirement as outlined as we saw in section 9.1 subsection 1A. While there have not been any changes to these provisions, there are currently direct responsibilities pertaining to supervision in selected sections of the Occupational Health and Safety Act and the regulations. Here are some examples. Work refusal. Under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, Section 20, subsection 1. Any employee who believes that an act is likely to endanger his or any other employee's health or safety shall immediately report his concern to his supervisor, who shall promptly investigate the situation in the presence of the employee. PPE, Section 46, subsection 1 of the General Regulation. An employer shall implement a training program for an employee who may have to use, issue, test, or maintain respiratory protective equipment or supervise an employee who may have to use respiratory protective equipment. 3. Structural framework. Section 94.2, subsection 1 of the General Regulation. Where structural framework is being erected using structural steel or precast concrete, an employer shall ensure C. that a competent person designated by the employee to supervise the erection of the structural framework is present. And 4. Blasting. Section 147, subsection 2 under the General Regulation. Where more than one blaster is involved in a blasting operation, an employer shall designate one of the blasters to supervise the blasting operation. Here are some other examples. Since we know that supervision is so important, especially in hazardous situations, supervision is mentioned in different places when talking about diving, starting at section 302 of the General Regulation, and logging, starting at section 344 of the General Regulation. When it comes to underground mining, supervisors are mentioned 33 times in the mining regulation. As for electrical work, an employer shall ensure that at least one qualified person is present at all times when conducting specific electrical work, and that the employee works under the direct supervision of the qualified person as described in section 294, subsection 4 of the General Regulation. Mobile crane inspection, 213.21 subsection 1 of the General Regulation. An employer shall ensure that a mobile crane is inspected every 12 months by an engineer or a competent person who is supervised by an engineer. And hoisting apparatus, section 210.1 subsection 2, no person shall operate a hoisting apparatus unless the person is competent or is under the direct supervision of a competent person. In the previous legislation, it stated that employers were required to provide the supervision that was necessary to ensure the health and safety of their employees. Now, under Section 9, subsection 1, paragraph C.3 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the employers are required to ensure the work is competently supervised and that the designated supervisors have the following knowledge. 1. The Occupational Health and Safety Act and any regulations under this act that apply to the place of employment. 2. Any safety policy for the place of employment. 3. Any health and safety program for the place of employment. 4. Any health and safety procedures with respect to hazards in connection with the use, handling, storage, disposal, and transport of any tool, equipment, machine, device, or biological, chemical, or physical agent by employees who work under the supervisor's supervision and direction. 5. any protective equipment required to ensure the health and safety of the employees who work under the supervisor's supervision and direction, and 6, any other matters that are necessary to ensure the health and safety of the employees who work under the supervisor's supervision and direction. What does competently supervised mean? For employees to be competently supervised, employers must ensure that supervisors are qualified through training and/or experience for the work to be supervised and have access to and sufficient knowledge to be able to understand and apply the health and safety elements that were outlined in the previous slide and that we see again in the current slide. With the training and experience they bring to the job and the knowledge provided to them by the employer, supervisors can then competently meet their obligations to acquaint, inform, and instruct by making sure employees under their supervision, 1, are aware of the hazards and risks associated with the different tasks they perform. For example, they may tell employees about the hazards of energized machinery or verify that the employees know about the hazards of energized machinery. 2, know how to do the work safely. For example, provide the lockout procedure for machines employees work with, or verify that employees have received the lockout procedure for machines they work with. And 3, have received clear steps verbally or in writing on how to do the tasks safely. For example, show the employee step by step how to lock out the machine, or verify the employee knows how to apply the procedure to lock out a machine. In some workplaces, shift work can mean that the supervisor in charge and the employees who report to them vary. In these cases, both the employer and the supervisor must confirm that the employees have been acquainted, informed, and instructed as outlined above to ensure their health and safety. Employers are not only responsible to ensure that the workplace is competently supervised, they also must ensure that the workplace is sufficiently supervised as outlined in Section 92C.4 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. If you look at sufficient supervision as a place in time with a certain set of circumstances, such as the employees under supervision, the metaphor is that of a sliding scale when it comes to determining the extent of direct or close proximity supervision. Providing adequate supervision can involve spending time on the shop floor, management by walking around, observations, the use of checklists, job shadowing, or other methods such as temporarily delegating authority to an experienced employee if other work demands prevents the supervisor from being present during a specific project. One factor to consider when determining how much supervision is needed to ensure the work is sufficiently supervised include, for example, that of employee competency. Normally, a new employee requires more direct supervision than an employee who has more years of experience. As the employee gains experience, they require less supervision. Sufficient supervision will depend not only on employee competency, but is a balance of different factors, including the type of work being supervised. The greater the complexity, the closer the supervision needed, such as blasting operations versus office work. Availability of detailed written instructions. The more detailed the instructions for tasks being performed, the less direct supervision is required, such as a task for which a written procedure is available versus a task with verbal instructions. The employees being supervised. The level of supervision will depend on employee skills and experience with the tasks. Are employees competent? As seen previously, a new employee requires more direct supervision, and so may an experienced employee performing an unfamiliar or infrequent task. At the same time, an experienced workforce can become complacent, necessitating enhanced direct supervision. The potential consequences and outcomes of the work being performed. The greater the likelihood of an incident and the more severe the potential injury, the greater the need for direct supervision. Hazards and risks are higher in construction compared to office work, for example. When supervisors spend more time on the shop floor, looking for unsafe conditions, hazards, or unsafe acts, and take steps to promptly correct them, this will result in a safer workplace. During this time, supervisors can ensure employees' performance meets safety expectations by correcting unsafe behaviors, that everyone has the tools and/or equipment they need, and that the tools are properly maintained to carry out their work safely, and new hazards that might result from changes in personnel, equipment, process, or materials are identified and controlled before the change takes place. You may wonder, how will health and safety officer interventions change as a result of these modifications to the Occupational Health and Safety Act? Officers will be assessing supervision competency and sufficiency using a supervisor assessment tool. For incident investigations, they will take into consideration the competency and sufficiency of supervision when it has been determined that the employer has met the obligations of the legislation pertaining to the specific task involved in the incident. For rights to refuse and complaints, they will assess the competency and sufficiency of supervision for any work refusal or complaint pertaining to supervision or lack thereof. They will also assess the competency and sufficiency of supervision during some planned and spontaneous inspections. To access tools and resources on our website, click on Safety Topics and search for Supervisor. There you will find posters, pamphlets, and interpretation to help you determine who is a supervisor in your workplace and frequently asked questions. In addition, you can download for free on your smartphone the NBOHS Guide app, and there you will find additional information that you can refer to anywhere. In summary, employers must ensure that all supervisors are qualified, so they can apply all acts, regulations, and safe work procedures, and provide the appropriate level of supervision to ensure that employees under their direction are safe. I hope this presentation was helpful in clarifying the changes of the legislation as it pertains to supervisor and employer responsibilities. If you have questions that are not addressed in the frequently asked questions in the supervisor topic page, please contact the WorkSafe NB prevention staff at prevention@ws-ts.nb.ca, and someone from my team will be happy to respond to you.